not going to be one of those videos like last week where I rode off into the sunset in my newly acquired Jeep CJ-5. As you can see, I've set up a work table here, which I highly recommend. But let's have some real talk about what this project's looking like. Sorry, I kind of did a script. But so this is the 79 Jeep CJ-5 that you would have seen last week. It's a beater. I picked it up for 800 bucks. It is definitely a project. Nothing worked except for it was a running driving machine within about 4 hours and a couple $100. And we'll get into that in a couple minutes. So last weekend, after I got done filming the last video, I went and did kind of a deep dive. I pulled the dash apart. I started looking at the wiring and thinking about, or in the vein of, repairing the existing wiring, because that's always kind of my first go-to. But at every turn, there was connectors that had been cut out. There was wiring that just didn't make any sense. There was a variety of tape splices. There was solder joints that had been kind of put together. The thing had been hot wired, I think, multiple times. The ignition switch doesn't work. Like I said, it was a fire hazard. As you can see, I've got some stuff here on the table that was cut out of it. This is the fuse block. The other end of the bulkhead connector is still in the engine bay. This is some under the dash wiring harness, if you get an idea of kind of what we're looking at. Most of this, believe it or not, but for this cut, was all done prior to me getting the car. So let's talk about some wiring stuff. So at some point, your time is worth something, even if you're me just messing around with things. And so I've been keeping track of kind of a parts list, because I feel like I've done a bunch of projects similar to this, and I think you lose sight of how much time and how much money you actually put toward a project like this. Keeping in mind, I'm only like a week and a half into this deal. I haven't done anything mechanical to the car. I already know there's a broken vent line on the front differential, there's U-joints, there's kind of a sketchy transfer case mount situation with the skid plate. I haven't disassembled anything underneath the car. I know that the right or left front, driver's side front brake caliper needs some attention. So there's already things on this car that I know it's going to need absent the wiring. And so why did I go after the wiring initially right out of the gate? Well, once I had a good running car, that enabled me to basically say, okay, well, I'm going to make this thing at least street legal, safe to drive. Unfortunately, the stuff under the dash was a fire hazard, and I'm not going to drive around in it. I'm not going to have my wife and kids drive around in it. I'm not going to sell it on to somebody. And we'll talk about flipping cars here in a little bit, because I think people have an idea of flipping it, and I'm not sure I could have made money out of the gate flipping this car, and I've got some numbers here. But let's talk about the wiring harness that I did get. I'll put up an image of the Amazon link. It's a 21 circuit, I think Vogue or Vought, off-brand, kind of a universal wiring harness for hot rods and primarily GM, Mopar, that sort of thing. I'm crazy. There's not a huge AMC contingent of wiring harnesses out there. I think you can buy one from Painless Performance that's basically a plug-and-play model. However, I paid $108. A Painless Performance one is $1,000, which after I get done with this may be a bargain. I don't know. So, like I said, I had done some troubleshooting. I actually got the amp meter to move. I think most of the stuff, all these cable activated stuff, I freed this stuff up for the HVAC stuff. This is how you would start the vehicle here, with a push button and a toggle switch. These Jeeps of this era have a GM steering column, so I've gone ahead and, because of the wiring harness I bought, I've also purchased and have on order turn signal switch as well as an ignition switch. And so that should be plug and play-ish type stuff. That's not getting into the catastrophe that's happening behind this thing. As you can see, there's some empty holes now. There was a factory tack that basically fell into pieces when I was dealing with it. Additionally, there was another gauge, and I forget what that other hole was, but it was not a factory gauge, so I took that out. I've purchased and currently this weekend am installing or working out the installation of the new wiring harness. It is spliced and connected, and about half of that is still connected. The thing that's got me kind of going is it has an HEI ignition, which I don't want to mess up. And when you're going into a project like this, although it doesn't appear so, I put this stuff out here as kind of props. This was a pretty significant, it was organized prior to me turning on the camera, I should say. But what I've got, shoot, it's out of frame, but I did a couple things. In diagnosing the wires, I looked again at the splices, the dead ends, the plugs with no connectors, and I elected to purchase this wiring harness. It was about $108. Sorry, I'm going to move out of frame here for just a second. Some more props. So, some of the things that have helped me in doing this, I bought the wiring harness, I followed the directions. The directions are actually pretty good for a basic general installation. That's right here. I wonder if it says what this is on the front. It does. 21 circuit wiring harness directions. Doesn't say who made it, but again, I'll put up an image. The other thing I did is I went online and I located an actual 1979 Jeep CJ wiring diagram. Well, you're probably saying to yourself, how did you make it that big? Well, what I did is I saved the image to my phone. I went to the local UPS store, and believe it or not, all I had to do was email them the image, and they gave me an exploded 11 by 17 copy of that wiring diagram, which I think is going to be pretty vital in this project. The other things that I would advise are, I bought some, this is an electrical tape. It's actually it's made to wrap wiring harnesses. That was $10 or $12 well spent. I went ahead and raided the pantry and got a bunch of baggies. As you can see, I've got some parts labeled and bagged up. New Sharpie always helps. I've made some wiring connections already. I went ahead and installed the front group. So basically the front turn signals and headlights are basically as far as I've gotten. I'm going from front to back. And in doing that, fortunately I have some pretty good electrical tools. If you're going to do this, I think the current wisdom is to solder everything and heat shrink everything, which, hey, if you've got the technology to do that and the tools to do that, by all means, I think that is a wonderful way to get that done. However, I have a lot of crimp-on connectors, and I've bought more. These are actually cable cutters from Klein. I highly recommend, if you're a professional electrician, you probably know all about Klein tools. I think they're available at even Home Depot these days. My Klein copper wiring, of course somebody's going to drive by right now. Okay, take two. I've got these Klein hand tools, which are my wire cutters and my cable cutters. Additionally, if you're crimping on connectors, in my experience, and I did that sort of thing professionally for a period of time, I highly recommend not using these or any automotive style crimpers. They're just not that great. For 20 bucks, 30 bucks, you can go buy, I know Klein, these are a Thomas & Betts crimper. They're not made by Klein, but Klein makes them just identical to this. That's what I've been using, as well as heat shrink, to make the connections that I've already made, and I'll continue to do that. So let's talk about this car in relation to, gee whiz, all of a sudden the whole neighborhood wants to drive by. So obviously this video, I'm not going to be cruising around the neighborhood with some awesome lighthearted music, because it's not running. It drove to where it's at. But let's talk about some actual numbers. Let's say you cruise Facebook Marketplace like I do, and you want to flip a car, and you have the purchase price, and you have your labor, and all the labor that I'm providing in these numbers is 30 bucks an hour. That's what I used, which is low. If you pay somebody at a shop to do it, you're not going to get that rate. But what I the work I've done through today and the parts that I've purchased, I'm in this, let's see, 800 for the car. Parts, I've got 536.88 invested. That's starter, solenoid, battery, and wiring harness. The rest of it is just kind of little bits and pieces, miscellaneous type stuff. Nothing more than $20 or $30. But you know, a turn signal switch, $30 something. Ignition switch, $20 or $30. That sort of thing. So all in right now where I'm at, parts and labor, I estimate that I've got about $2,626.88, counting the purchase of the vehicle. 1,290 of that was in labor. I'm figuring to date I have about 43 hours labor involved in this project. Let's say I was buying this for a flip. I think that it would have been, it's currently I think the 13th or 14th of September. So going back to September 6th, I had just invested about 28 hours at that point, so that would have been $840. My parts and purchase of the vehicle and all the related costs would have been about $1,121, and so I would have been into this, by my estimate, about $1,962.32, and that was just running and driving. That's without anything else functioning. Basically, I've got a running, driving Jeep. So yeah, I could have flipped it. I could have sold it on at maybe $2,500 if I marketed it properly. It would have been pretty close. I wouldn't have made very much money. Frankly, it wouldn't have been a profit margin that, you know, I'm not in this for a profit. But just to give you some bare bones, I feel like a lot of people flip stuff and do things and they kind of shortcut stuff. And at some point, like this wiring harness project, I'm going to be in this. It's not the cost of the wiring harness, it's the cost of my time. And certainly if I was to charge Rick's labor that he's put forth, it would be exponentially higher, because you're not going to hire a person of his skill for peanuts like I'm willing to work for. But I hope you found some value in this. I would encourage you to get involved in Rusty Junk and do stuff. Just maybe not have a profit motive, because I'm not going to make a profit on this. I can tell you that right now. My profit will be in enjoying the vehicle, and that's really my intention. And again, we haven't talked about tires, wheels, shocks, bushings, potential springs, body parts, labor, getting the body into better shape, any of that stuff. So a new windshield, you know, there's a ton of stuff this thing needs. So if you're watching this thinking, hey, I'm going to go out and buy this great vehicle and it's going to be all wine and roses, and you know, yeah, if you buy it and you dink around with it for a weekend and then flip it for $500 or $1,000 more, then more power to you. And I don't think that's necessarily the reality in all cases. Fortunately, that was never in my intention with this car. It certainly is not going to get a nut and bolt restoration, but it is going to be something I mess with. I have a lot of time on my hands these days, so I have the ability, and I have a shop, to, you know, have this space and kind of mess with it. But I do hope that you've enjoyed watching the videos. I hope that you enjoy watching this video. Obviously, it's not as good as the last video, because it wasn't this one episode turnaround of, hey, now I'm driving around the neighborhood. But I hope you stick around, and it's going to come together. Trust me, I've embarked on any other hopeless, you know, tilted at windmills, if you will. So stick around, watch this episode. I hope if you stuck around this long, and we'll see what we can get up to in the future. I promise you that future projects, I'm probably not going to video a whole bunch more of this, because it's not an installation guide for grafting this specific wiring harness to this specific Jeep, because I'm not that skilled and I wouldn't want other people to like catch their vehicles on fire, that sort of thing. So watch for entertainment purposes. But again, I'll try to shoot out another video next week. Hopefully, if it's not Jeep related, it'll be something cool. So have a good afternoon or evening or morning or whenever you happen to watch this. I look forward to seeing you soon. And that's probably about it for this one. All right. Oh. Whoops. All right, here we go. That is one unhappy fuse block.